Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, as you know, on December 7th, 1941. And that plunged the whole world into another world war. For Japanese Americans, American citizens of Japanese ancestry, it was a catastrophic experience because overnight we were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I was born in Hong Kong and I moved to LA when I was 13.
In 2000.
In 2000. That was after like the handoff from the British colony back to China, right? And I think there was a lot of worry there. It's probably one of the reasons why our family moved here. And when I first came here, I couldn't really speak English very well. Kind of like Jing Yang, you know? And I'd learned English in Hong Kong how kids here would learn Spanish.
Right.
So it's not very well. And like I didn't understand like the simplest slangs like what's up, like they don't teach you that in school, like what's up, you know, right? And eventually I learned a lot of English by watching BET Rap City. That was like my thing.
So at the time that I was growing up, there were so few Asians in America that it was as though when my family walked into a store anywhere, it would be like every head in the room would turn and look in unison, and with that look, not like, hey, welcome, but instead it would be, what are you doing here in my America? And just that feeling of always being an alien, you know, and we talk about aliens today, but it was really like being an alien from Mars. And that look, especially when you think about the 1950s, the 1960s, and even 1970s, every war that was fought was against people in East Asia. So as a kid, when we would go to the movies, you know, there would be that defining crescendo in a war movie where, you know, it was like, oh, the Americans are winning and we are going to kill them, kill them, kill them, and the them looked just like us.
How do we address the current immigration and the ongoing immigration issues that are happening not only in this country but around the world? How do we help other people in other countries in need? And I think especially the Vietnamese community, we have a lot to say about it. And we, especially since our community was the last major migration of refugees into America, we haven't had another recent one. And I think that the Vietnamese American community can be seen as an example of the incredible benefits and richness that can happen when you're generous and when you're compassionate and when you're exercising empathy, which is, I think, something that's really important to consider when we're thinking about a lot of laws that are being enacted and proposed right now.
I think the way that TV specifically contributes to it, you know, in this kind of invisibility of Asians, is that we get used to seeing a distorted picture, a filtered version. It's being filtered invisibly. And because of that, I feel like you go to TV and you know that's not reality, and yet your brain on some level takes it as a substitute for reality. So that when you see the Asian on TV, all of a sudden that filtered reality for a minute gets like a glitch in the matrix. Like, oh yeah, that's right, there are Asians. But and so that disconnect is like why it's such a jarring experience. I think that feedback loop is starting to get broken. Now you can like see an Asian on TV and it's not like, oh my God, there's an Asian on TV. But that's a pretty recent thing. And, you know, I don't think that, you know, I certainly won't be complacent in just thinking, well, now that the ball has started to roll, it's only going to get better from here.
I think we could have a bigger imagination than we often do when it comes to casting. And now I think it's definitely becoming more of a sort of awakening in Hollywood that you can do that and you can still have a successful film. But I think for a long time, the understanding was, well, we have to have like a green lightable actress to play the part. And, you know, it's not like a coincidence that all the green lightable ones, for the most part, are white actors.
We often look at change as being a very gradual process.
But changing opinions is not. Changing opinion happens extremely quickly. So you look at something like 9/11, anti-Muslim sentiment in the US changed kind of overnight. And with COVID, it was kind of a similar thing in a lot of Western countries where you saw, not a huge amount of anti-Asian sentiment before that, but then because of some of the political messaging, I think, around the origins of COVID, it's just appeared. It sparked.
The main takeaways of my portion of the talk is, first of all, to talk about the growing importance of Asian Americans, but to show that that growth in and of itself is limited because there's a big gap between what our numbers look like and where we stand in terms of leadership and civic engagement. And I'll submit to you that the problems of leadership and mobility within the corporate structure is related to our lack of visibility when it comes to civic engagement, and the solutions are linked as well.
I've grown up in many different places. I was born in India, grew up in the UK, and then spent my high school and college years in Florida, and then New York. And so there was a sense of for me, encapsulated that immigrant journey, that immigrant experience of living in different places, having to be a constant. I think a lot of what I've done has involved sort of shape-shifting and adapting to environments, different environments. It's probably why I became an actor on some level.
Growing up as an immigrant, watching my mom and dad navigate the first coming to America, and not knowing the language, and having to work in a restaurant, and my mom was a seamstress, and these low-paying jobs just for our future. And I think for me, the fact of a restaurant and hospitality was always in my DNA. Like, my uncles, my aunts were all in the restaurant business, and I just saw it was like kind of my calling to join that part of business. My
parents were working class, so my mom used to be a bookkeeper. My dad was an engineer, and they struggled in a working class way. Like I grew up in Astoria, and I did follow kind of a very typical second generation Asian American path, where New York City public schools, went to a specialized high school, was on financial aid, and I ended up working at places that were very institutional. So I became a lawyer, and the law firms that I worked at were all 100 years old. And I worked in the Southern District of New York, over 100 years old. And I worked at Barnard College, over 100 years old. And I think because of that, it always made me appreciate that institutions, are built on the shoulders of those who came before us.
I usually say, my name is RUDRANI CHETTRI, and I'm a trans woman. I'm a transgender person. And this is how I identify myself, and I'm not at all apologetic about who I am. And I feel so proud of myself. And I think though the life has been difficult for a trans person in India and also rest of the countries in the world, but I feel very proud that I've born as a trans woman, and I hope that I also, if there's something like next birth, if I get a chance to be a human, I want to be a trans woman again.
I was born in Taipei and moved to the US when I was 5 and grew up in an immigrant Chinese family. So I definitely grew up with the tale, the legend. And, every year my family would gather on our front lawn and eat mooncakes and gaze up on the moon. And every year I swore I could see that rabbit up there. So, when I went to school, nobody else knew of the tale. And so it was a really special thing to be able to bring this to life in this film and, kind of share this story with the world.
I think that recognition of that and speaking out against the fact that how Asian Americans can be complicit against African Americans is something that I think we should all speak out against. In the same way, if we expect allies when people are attacking Asian Americans, we should certainly really think about how we could be anti-racist. And I think anti-racism is a is the minimum requirement that we have.
We talk so distinctly about Black culture, Asian culture, Latino culture, but there's nothing that is being discussed about mixed race people and how they can own their ethnicity. And so we sort of fall in this limbo where when we try to speak up, they're like, no, you're not Asian enough, or you're not white enough. I was never white enough for the UK, I was never Asian enough for Singapore and Malaysia. But I sure as hell wasn't gonna let that put me down and not have the ability to own and be proud of my heritage. So I did that very young. And so I've been fighting it my entire life. So when that came up, it wasn't a surprise. It was just another thing. But at this point, we have the platform to be able to discuss these issues. You know, talking about Asian rights, it's rights in general. It's about being Portuguese mixed with Malaysian. Like in Malaysia and Singapore, there's so much mixed heritage, from the Portuguese to the Spanish to the Dutch, all integrating into culture. So why can't we be proud of that? Why can't we own that as a badge of pride?